They thought they were escorting an exhausted director out of the building. Actually, they had just removed $540 million in future revenue from their own pipeline. By the time my keycard was deactivated, clients were already forwarding me panicked emails from my old firm. Wall Street calls it an unexplained revenue hole. I call it the price for every Friday afternoon meeting I walked into alone. My name is Isla Watson. I am 38 years old, and up until 4:15 this afternoon, I was the director of enterprise accounts for Helix Point Systems in Dallas. Now, I am just a liability walking down a hallway lined with glass walls, carrying a cardboard box that contains a succulent I have kept alive longer than the tenure of the man who just fired me. The email that ended my 11-year career arrived with the subject line, "Quick Sync." In the corporate world, nothing good ever happens in a quick sync scheduled for late Friday afternoon. It is the coward's time slot. It is designed to minimize the blast radius. They think if they cut off the limb right before the weekend, the bleeding will stop by Monday morning. They are wrong. I walked into conference room B, the one we used to call the fishbowl because of its floor-to-ceiling glass paneling. The blinds were drawn. That was the first tell. The air conditioning in the room was set to a temperature that felt designed to preserve meat. Sitting at the head of the mahogany table was Derek Vaughn, our new chief revenue officer, looking every bit the private equity mercenary he was hired to be. To his right sat Melanie Rhodes from Human Resources, a woman who had once asked me for advice on her toddler's sleep training but now refused to make eye contact with anything other than the stack of documents in front of her. "Please sit down." "Isla," Derek said. He did not smile. He wore a navy blazer that cost more than my first car, and he had the posture of a man who practiced power poses in the mirror before leaving his penthouse. I sat. I placed my hands on the cold table and waited. I knew the script. I had seen them run this play on 3 other directors in the last 6 months. Isla, as you know, we have been looking closely at our organizational structure following the acquisition by Baystone Capital. Derek began. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, and utterly hollow. "We have identified significant misalignments with our new go-to-market strategy. We feel that your leadership style is no longer a fit for the velocity we need to achieve." I watched his mouth move. He was using words like velocity and alignment to dress up a simple fact. They wanted my salary off the books, and they wanted my portfolio redistributed to the cheaper, younger account executives they had hired last month. Melanie cleared her throat. She pushed a thick folder across the table toward me. "Inside this packet, you will find your separation agreement. Isla, it outlines your severance package, which is contingent on your signature." I looked down at the paper on top of the stack. It was a standard termination letter. My eyes drifted to my name printed at the top. Isla Watson, right over the letter S in my last name. There was a brown ring, a coffee stain. Someone had set their mug down on my termination notice before handing it to me. It was such a small, careless detail, but it hit me harder than the words Derek was speaking. 11 years. I had given this company 11 years of my life. I had missed my best friend's wedding to close the TechCore deal. I had taken calls from the hospital waiting room when my father had his bypass surgery. I had built a client portfolio worth $540 million in cumulative contract value, and they could not even print a clean sheet of paper to fire me. Derek continued, his tone hardening slightly. "We have also had reports regarding toxicity within your team, resistance to leadership feedback. We need rowers. Isla, not anchors. Toxicity, that was rich coming from a man who referred to the support staff as overhead and canceled the holiday bonus program to fund a new executive retreat in Aspen. I did not defend myself. I knew that arguing with a decision that had been made 3 weeks ago in a boardroom in New York was a waste of breath. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my notebook. It was a small black moleskin, the edges frayed from use. I opened it to a fresh page, uncapped my pen, and wrote down the word toxicity. Then I wrote down the time. 4:22 in the afternoon. Derek paused. He did not like that I was writing. He expected tears. He expected shouting. He did not know how to handle silence and a ballpoint pen. Melanie tapped the severance agreement. "We are offering 12 weeks of pay. Isla. In exchange, we require you to sign the attached general release, which includes a standard non-disparagement clause and a reaffirmation of your non-compete agreement. You are restricted from working for any competitor in the SaaS enterprise space for 24 months. I looked up from my notebook. 12 weeks for 11 years. And you want to lock me out of my industry for 2 years. It is standard, Derek said, leaning forward. His cologne smelled like musk and aggression. Look, Isla, we want this to be amicable. We want to support your transition. But I need to be clear. If you decide to make this difficult, or if you refuse to sign the release, we will be forced to conduct a full audit of your past commission payouts. We would hate to find any clerical errors that might require us to claw back funds. There it was. The threat? It was subtle, wrapped in corporate politeness. But it was a shakedown. Sign the paper, shut your mouth, and go away quietly, or we will tie you up in legal battles over money you earned 3 years ago. I finished writing his sentence in my notebook. I looked at the coffee stain on my name one last time. I closed the notebook and placed my pen back in my bag. I am not signing anything today, I said. My voice was steady. It surprised even me. I will take this home and review it with my counsel. Derek's eyes narrowed. The offer expires in 48 hours. Isla. I stood up. I did not shake his hand. I did not look at Melanie, who was now staring intensely at her cuticles. I picked up the folder, careful not to touch the coffee stain, and walked to the door. Please leave your laptop and badge at the security desk in the lobby, Melanie whispered. I walked out of the fishbowl. The office was quiet. Most of the sales floor had already left for happy hour, a tradition I used to lead before Derek banned team outings that were not focused on revenue generation. I walked past the empty cubicles, past the award case that still held the Sales Leader of the Year trophy with my name etched into the glass. It felt like walking through a museum of a civilization that had already collapsed. I reached the elevator bank and pressed the down button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. Then I realized Melanie had not just been staring at her hands. She had been texting it. They had cut my access before I even left the room. My keycard was dead. I was locked out of the system. I was a ghost in the building I helped buy. A junior developer named Marcus was walking by, heading for the exit. He saw me standing there, pressing the button on a dead badge. He looked confused, then realized what was happening. He avoided my eyes, swiped his own badge to call the elevator, and then pretended to check his phone so he would not have to ride down with the woman who just got executed. I stepped into the elevator alone. The doors slid shut, sealing me in the stainless steel box. I watched the numbers count down. Floor 10, floor 9, floor 8. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my personal phone. It was the only thing I owned that they could not wipe remotely. I opened my encrypted messaging app and found the contact saved as Orion Bridge. Caleb. My thumb hovered over the screen. I thought about the severance package. I thought about the 12 weeks of pay. I thought about the threat to audit my commissions. I thought about the coffee stain on my name. Derek Vaughn thought he had won. He thought he had cut the cost, trimmed the fat, and secured the portfolio. He looked at a spreadsheet and saw numbers that belonged to Helix Point. He did not understand that enterprise sales is not about contracts, it is about relationships. He did not understand that when I spent Christmas Eve on a conference call with the CIO of a Fortune 500 retailer, I was not building loyalty to a logo, I was building loyalty to me. I typed the message. It happened. Ready to talk about those transfers, I hit send. Just as the elevator reached the lobby, the signal bars held strong. Delivered. I walked out of the building and into the humid Dallas heat. The security guard, an older man named Earl, whom I brought coffee for every Monday morning, gave me a sad wave. He knew. Everyone always knows before you do. I walked to my car, tossed the box with the succulent into the passenger seat, and started the engine. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt a cold, sharp clarity settling in my chest. They called it a necessary restructuring. Wall Street would call it an unexplained revenue hole of $540 million. I called it the price of admission. I checked my phone one last time. 3 dots appeared. dancing on the screen. Then a reply from Caleb, "Let's burn it down." I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. By Monday morning, Derek Vaughn would be the one staring at a piece of paper, wondering where it all went wrong. But for now, it was just a Friday afternoon, and I had work to do. 11 years ago, I was not a director of enterprise accounts. I was 27 years old, drowning in $40,000 of student loan debt, and living in a studio apartment in Garland that smelled perpetually of damp drywall and other people's cooking. I drove a Honda Civic with a cracked bumper and a transmission that slipped whenever it rained. When I walked into Helix Point for my first interview, it was not the glass and steel fortress it is today. It was a chaotic, vibrant startup occupying the second floor of a renovated warehouse in Deep Ellum. The air conditioning rattled, the coffee was terrible, and the energy was electric. I wanted that job more than I wanted air in my lungs. I needed the base salary, sure, but more than that, I needed to believe I was going somewhere. I started as an account coordinator, which is a corporate title for a person who gets yelled at by everyone for things they did not do. But I did not mind. I swallowed the stress and turned it into fuel. I became the first person to unlock the office door in the morning and the last person to set the alarm at night. I learned the product better than the engineers who built it. I learned the clients better than they knew themselves. Over the next decade, I ceased to be just Isla Watson. I became Isla from Helix. That name meant something to my clients. I was not a vendor. I was the person who remembered that the CIO of a major logistics firm had a daughter with a peanut allergy, so I made sure the gift baskets were safe. I was the person who sent a pizza to a deployment team in Chicago at 2 a.m. because I knew they were pulling an all-nighter to meet a deadline. I was the safety net. I remember one specific Tuesday in November. 4 years into my tenure, a massive storm had knocked out power at the headquarters of our biggest retail client right before a critical Black Friday readiness demo. Their VP of operations was panicking. The Wi-Fi was dead. The projectors were dark, and the board was furious. I drove 40 miles through torrential rain to his house in Highland Park. We sat on the rug in his living room, tethering my laptop to his personal hotspot, and I ran the entire demo for his board of directors on a 13-inch screen while his golden retriever slept on my foot. We closed the deal. That contract alone was worth $12 million over 3 years. That was the day I stopped being a coordinator and started being a legend within those walls. Back then, Helix Point felt like a family. I know how naive that sounds now. I know that calling a company a family is usually just a manipulation tactic to extract unpaid labor. But back then, it felt true. The founders knew my name. They knew I was sending money home to help my mom. On Fridays, we did not have mandatory town halls with soulless slide decks about synergy. We had actual parties with cheap beer and greasy pizza, where the CTO would play guitar, and we would talk about how we were going to change the industry. We felt like we were building a cathedral, brick by brick. I poured everything into that cathedral. I poured my youth into it. I missed my best friend's rehearsal dinner because a server migration went sideways in London. I missed a week-long vacation to Cabo that I had already paid for because a client threatened to churn if I was not personally overseeing their renewal. The hardest one to swallow, the one that still wakes me up at night, was my uncle's funeral. He was the man who taught me how to drive, the man who co-signed my first lease. I was in a terrifyingly important negotiation with a healthcare giant in Nashville. I justified it to myself by saying the deal was too big to leave, that my uncle would have wanted me to succeed. So I sent flowers to the funeral home and stayed in a hotel conference room, hammering out service-level agreements while my family mourned. I closed the deal. I got a bonus. I never got to say goodbye. That was the bargain I made. I traded moments of my life for the promise of a future. I believed that if I built enough value, if I made myself indispensable, the company would take care of me. Then came Baystone Capital. The acquisition happened 3 years ago. It was swift and sterile. The founders took their payouts and disappeared to private islands, replaced by a board of directors who looked at our product and saw only an extraction opportunity. The culture shifted overnight. The cheap beer and guitar sessions were replaced by efficiency audits. The language changed first. We stopped talking about clients and started talking about wallet share. We stopped talking about solving problems and started talking about optimizing recurring revenue. Human beings became headcount. I watched the purge begin. It was slow at first, then accelerating. The marketing manager who had been there since day one was let go because she lacked digital transformation experience. The head of customer support, a man who knew every bug in the system by heart, was replaced by an outsourced call center in a different time zone. I watched empty boxes pile up on desks. I watched good people cry in the break room. But I stayed. I stayed because I had built a portfolio of $540 million. I stayed because I told myself I was different. I was a revenue generator. I was Isla from Helix. I thought my numbers were a shield. I thought my loyalty was a currency that Baystone Capital would honor. I was wrong. I was just an asset with a depreciating value in their eyes. For the last 3 years, I chased the vice president title. It was the carrot they dangled in front of me to keep me running. Every annual review, I would walk in with my metrics, my growth charts, my glowing client testimonials, and every year, the goalposts would move. 2 years ago, it was Ela. You are incredible, but we need to see more data-driven leadership before we can bump you to VP. Last year, it was Ela. The numbers are great, but we need proof of scale. Can you replicate your success with a smaller team? We need to see you do more with less. 6 months ago, it was, the market is volatile, Ela. We are freezing all executive promotions until Q4. Just hang in there. You are top of the list. I believe them. God help me. I believe them. I thought if I just worked a little harder, if I just closed one more 8-figure deal, if I just absorbed a little more stress so my team didn't have to, they would finally hand me the title I had earned 5 times over. I did not see the truth until I was sitting in that glass room with the coffee stain on my termination paper. They never intended to promote me. I was too valuable right where I was, doing the work of 3 people for the price of 1. Promoting me would have meant paying me more and hiring 2 people to replace my output. Keeping me desperate kept me profitable. I built a kingdom for them. I smoothed over their mistakes with my personal relationships. I used my own reputation to vouch for their buggy software updates. I looked clients in the eye and promised them that Helix Point would always have their back, because I believed I was Helix Point. But standing in the parking lot with my box of belongings, I realized the most painful truth of all. To my clients, I was the company, but to the company, I was just a line item on a spreadsheet that had finally turned red. 11 years of late nights, 11 years of missed memories, 11 years of loyalty, all amounting to a security escort and a disabled keycard. I looked at the text message from Caleb again. I thought about the $540 million in contracts that were technically owned by Helix Point, but emotionally owned by me. I had spent a decade building someone else's dream. It was time to wake up. If they wanted to treat me like a transaction, I would show them exactly what a transaction looked like when the other side held all the leverage. The arrival of Derek Vaughan was not an introduction, it was an invasion. Baystone Capital did not hire him to build. They hired him to strip the copper wiring out of the walls before the building collapsed. His LinkedIn profile was a manifesto of corporate violence. It was longer than most doctoral theses and riddled with terms like restructuring expert and turnaround architect, but the title he wore most proudly, the one he whispered into the ears of the board members, was wartime CRO. He was the man you called when you wanted to trade long-term viability for a quarterly earnings spike that would make the investors salivate. He made his debut at an all-hands meeting on a rainy Tuesday morning. The old Helix Point town halls used to be casual affairs where people wore hoodies and drank bad coffee. Derek changed that dynamic instantly. He stood on the stage wearing a bespoke Italian blazer that cost more than the monthly take-home pay of our best support engineer. He did not use a microphone. He projected his voice with the confidence of a man who has never been interrupted in his life. Behind him, a single slide glowed on the massive screen. It was split down the middle, on the left, in a soft, weak blue font. It read, 11 years of comfort. On the right, in a jagged, aggressive red, it read, 11 quarters of war. He paced the stage, scanning the room as if he were looking for weak links in a chain. For a decade, this company has operated like a country club, Derek said. His voice was smooth, baritone, and terrifyingly calm. You have prioritized feelings over forecasts. You have prioritized tenure over traction. That ends today. The people who got us here are not necessarily the people who will get us to the exit. We are carrying too much legacy baggage. I felt the air leave the room. I looked around at my colleagues. These were the people who had built the code, answered the phones at 3 a.m, and slept under their desks during launch weeks. Derek Vaughan had just called them baggage. After the speech, he descended from the stage to mingle, or rather, to inspect the troops. He made a beeline for me. He knew exactly who I was. I was the director of enterprise accounts. I was the one holding the keys to the kingdom. Isla Watson, he said, extending a hand that felt like cold marble. I have heard a lot about you. You are basically the office mom here, right? He smiled. It was a shark's smile, all teeth and no warmth. I stiffened. I was 38 years old. I managed a portfolio worth $500 million. I negotiated contracts that kept this company solvent, and in 5 seconds, he had reduced me to a maternal caricature, implying that my value lay in baking cookies and wiping noses rather than driving revenue. I managed the strategic enterprise portfolio. Derek, I said, keeping my voice even. Right, he said, chuckling as if I had told a cute joke. The legacy accounts. Let us see if you can keep up with the new pace. Isla, we are going to be running sprints, not marathons. That was the beginning. The next day, my calendar, which had been carefully curated over a decade to balance client needs with team sanity, was firebombed. Derek deleted every single one of my recurring team syncs. He replaced them with a daily 8 a.m. meeting called the Revenue War Room. The War Room was designed for humiliation. There were no chairs. We had to stand. Derek claimed it kept the energy high, but really, it was just to make us uncomfortable. He would project a dashboard on the wall where every metric was tracked in real time. If you were 1% behind on your daily pacing, your name was highlighted in a violent, flashing red. He would stand at the front of the room, holding a laser pointer, and read the names of the underperformers aloud. He did not ask for context. He did not care that a deal was delayed because legal was redlining a contract. He just wanted a target. Jones, you are down 15% on activity, he would say. Are you tired? Do you need a nap? Or do you need a new job? It was psychological warfare. Then came the policies. In his second week, Derek raised the sales quotas by 40% across the board. When I asked him how we were supposed to hit that number without new product features, he told me I lacked imagination. Then came the commission freeze. He announced that all commission payouts would be moved to a quarterly schedule instead of monthly, and effectively deferred until the following fiscal year for verify purposes. He was stealing labor from my team to pad the company's cash flow for the current quarter, but the worst policy was regarding the clients. If they are low margin, let them walk. Derek said during a strategy session. I raised my hand. Derek, some of those low-margin clients are strategic logos. They give us credibility in the market. If we cut them off or stop supporting them, we lose the references that help us close the big deals. He looked at me with that same patronizing pity he had shown on day one. Isla, you are thinking like a farmer. I need you to think like a butcher. We do not need credibility. We need EBITDA. If they are not profitable today, they are dead weight. Cut the cord. He was asking me to abandon clients I had nurtured for 7 years. He was asking me to burn bridges I had built with my own hands. But what I did not realize was that he was not just giving orders, he was taking action. I started getting strange emails from my CIO contacts. They were confused. They asked why the new chief revenue officer had called them directly. I confronted him in the hallway. Derek, did you call the CIO of Omnicorp? He did not even stop walking. I did. Nice guy. Little chatty. That is my account. Derek, we have a renewal coming up in 6 months. Why are you contacting them without looping me in? He stopped and turned to face me. I am the chief revenue officer. Isla, I am the single point of truth for this organization. I got the feeling you were not driving the narrative hard enough with them. You are too friendly. You are too embedded. I needed to remind them that we are a business, not a charity. He had gone behind my back. He had called my oldest client and insulted them, all under the guise of driving the narrative. He was poisoning the well. I went to Human Resources. I booked a private session with Melanie Rhodes. I had known Melanie for 5 years. We had shared lunch. I thought she was an ally. I sat in her office, clutching my notebook where I had started documenting the quota hikes, the public shaming in the war room, and the unauthorized client calls. "Melanie," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice, "this is not sustainable. Derek is dismantling the team. He is bypassing directors. He is creating a hostile environment. People are scared to go to the bathroom because they are afraid they will miss a metric and get shouted at in the morning meeting." Melanie sighed. She looked tired. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Isla, look," she said softly. "Change is hard. I know it feels aggressive right now, but Baystone brought Derek in for a reason. We were stagnant. He was hired to shift the culture. It is not a culture shift. Melanie," I snapped, "it is abuse." Melanie's face hardened. She put her glasses back on. "That is a very strong word. Isla, I would be careful using it. Derek is a wartime leader. His methods are unconventional, but they get results. You need to give him time. You need to align with the new vision. Maybe the discomfort you are feeling is just growing pains." I stared at her. I realized then that Melanie was not the head of human resources. She was the head of risk management for Baystone Capital. Her job was not to protect the employees from Derek. Her job was to protect Derek from us. I walked out of her office feeling a cold chill run down my spine. It was not just that the culture was changing. It felt like someone had pumped odorless gas into the ventilation system. We were all breathing it in, getting dizzy and sick, and the people in charge were standing by the thermostat telling us to take deeper breaths because it was good for our character. Derek Vaughn was not just a bad boss. He was a cancer, and he had decided that I was the tumor that needed to be excised. But as I walked back to my desk, passing the war room with its flashing red lights, I tightened my grip on my notebook. If he wanted a war, he was going to get one. He just didn't know that I had been stockpiling ammunition for 11 years. It did not start with a scream. It started with silence. It started with the emails I did not receive. For 11 years, my inbox had been the central nervous system of our enterprise sales division. Nothing moved above a $10,000 threshold without me knowing about it. But slowly, subtly, the traffic stopped. I would walk by the break room and hear the vice president of sales discussing a pricing restructure for the healthcare vertical, a vertical I managed. When I asked about the meeting, he would look at his shoes and mutter that it was just a casual brainstorm. Then I would find out later that calendar invites had been sent, accepted, and executed without my name on the list. When I confronted Derek about this, he did not apologize. He turned it back on me. "I assumed you were too bogged down in administrative tasks to handle high-level strategy." "Isla," he said, sipping an espresso while leaning against my doorframe, "I was trying to protect your time. You always seem so overwhelmed lately." I was not overwhelmed. I was being erased. He began holding strategic planning calls with sales and finance, but intentionally excluded operations. This was a tactical move. He knew that sales would promise impossible features to close deals, and finance would approve the margins, but operations would be the ones to flag that the timeline was unachievable. By cutting me out, he removed the friction. He also removed the safety net. When the inevitable delivery failures happened, he could point at me and ask why I had not prepared the team. It was a game of microcuts, 1,000 tiny paper cuts designed to bleed me out so slowly that I would not notice I was dying until I collapsed. Our one-on-one meetings transformed from business reviews into psychological autopsies. Derek never gave me specific feedback on my numbers. Because my numbers were impeccable, my portfolio was the only thing keeping the lights on. So he attacked the intangible. He attacked my personality. "You are giving off defender energy. Isla, not hunter energy." He told me one Tuesday. I asked him to define defender energy. He waved his hand vaguely. It is a vibe. You are protective. You are cautious. You act like you own these accounts. Baystone needs hunters. We need people who are willing to kill what they eat. Another time, he printed out an email I had sent to the implementation team. In the email, I had asked for a status update on a delayed server migration. Your tone here, Derek said, tapping the paper. It reads heavy. Heavy. I repeated, yes, heavy. It feels burdensome. It feels like you are dragging the team down with details. We need levity. We need speed. There is no way to defend yourself against an accusation of being heavy. It is like fighting a ghost. If I argued, I was being defensive. If I stayed silent, I was being passive. The breaking point of his gaslighting campaign came on a Thursday afternoon. Derek called me into his office and placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. It was a screenshot of a Slack conversation I had with the head of product. In the chat, I had written, "This timeline is tight. We will need resourcing if we want to hit the Q3 launch date." Derek had taken a yellow highlighter and drawn a thick, wet line over that sentence. "This," he said, pointing at the yellow streak, "this is what I'm talking about. This is passive-aggressive resistance to leadership." I stared at the paper. I was stating a fact. "Derek, if we cut the timeline by 4 weeks, we need more engineers. That is not resistance. That is math." He shook his head, looking at me with that mock disappointment that made my stomach turn. "No, Isla, it is negativity. You are signaling to the product team that leadership has set them up to fail. You are undermining the mission." I walked out of his office with my hands shaking. I went straight to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and took out a black notebook. It was identical to the ones we used to give out as swag at conferences, nondescript and boring. I took a label maker and typed out a label that read, "Onboarding, Legacy Docs." I stuck it on the spine. Then I opened it and started writing. I did not write about my feelings. I did not write about how much I hated his cologne or his fake smile. I wrote down facts. October 14th, 2:30 in the afternoon. Derek Vaughn characterized a request for resource allocation as passive-aggressive resistance. Witnessed by no one. October 16th, 9 in the morning. Derek Vaughn excluded operations director from the Q4 pricing strategy call. Confirmed by Outlook calendar metadata. I accessed via the shared drive. I became a stenographer of my own demise, but I was not the only one bleeding. The week after the Slack incident, Noelle Hart disappeared. Noelle was a senior customer success manager who had been with Helix Point for 6 years. She was brilliant, kind, and tough as nails. One morning, her calendar was cleared. By noon, an email went out from HR. Noelle Hart has decided to pursue new opportunities outside of Helix Point. We wish her the best in her future endeavors. It was the standard corporate epitaph. I knew Noelle. I knew she had a mortgage and a mother in assisted living. She would not just decide to pursue new opportunities on a Tuesday without a backup plan. I called her. She did not answer. I drove to her apartment complex that evening. I found her sitting in her car in the parking lot. The engine was cold. She had been sitting there for 2 hours. She was not crying anymore. She was just staring at the steering wheel with a look of total devastation. She told me about her alignment chat with Derek. It had lasted 45 minutes. He had told her that she lacked the intellectual bandwidth to handle the new enterprise tier. He had told her that her questions in meetings were embarrassing to the department. He had offered her a choice: go on a performance improvement plan that was designed to fail, or resign immediately with 1 month of severance. She resigned. She felt she had no choice. He made me feel like I was crazy. "Isla," she whispered. He made me feel like I had been doing my job wrong for 6 years. I hugged her, and I promised her it was not her fault. But as I drove home, the sadness in my chest hardened into something colder. It hardened into a blade. The next morning, I took my black notebook to Melanie in HR. I did not show her the notebook, but I used it as a reference. I sat in her office and listed the incidents. I listed the exclusion from meetings. I listed the vague, non-actionable feedback. I told her about Noelle. Melanie listened. She nodded. She wrote a few things down on a legal pad. Then she gave me the look. The look that said she was about to say something that had been approved by legal counsel. "Isla, I hear your frustration," she said. "But looking at these examples, it is all very subjective without hard documentation. You feel excluded. You feel the feedback is vague. But Derek is driving a massive transformation. It is going to feel uncomfortable. That does not mean it is hostile. It just means it is different." She was telling me that my reality was not real because I did not have it on tape. She was telling me that unless I could prove the intent, the action did not matter. Hard documentation. I repeated, "Yes," Melanie said. "Unless there are specific violations of policy, this falls under management style, and Derek has the full support of the board to manage as he sees fit." I left her office. I understood the rules now. They were betting on the fact that conversations disappear into the air the moment they are spoken. They were betting on the he said, she said nature of corporate abuse. They relied on the fact that victims rarely have proof. That night, I sat at my kitchen table. The house was quiet. A glass of red wine sat untouched near my elbow. My laptop was open. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark room. I typed a question into the search bar. Texas recording laws, consent requirements. I hit enter. The results loaded instantly. Texas is a one-party consent state. This means that you can record a conversation you are a part of without the other person's permission. As long as one person in the conversation consents, and that person can be you, the recording is legal and admissible. I read the sentence 3 times. I felt a physical shift in my body. My heart rate slowed down. The tightness in my shoulders released. Melanie wanted hard documentation. Derek wanted to play games with words, using language that vanished as soon as it hit the air. They thought they were operating in the shadows where they could bully and gaslight without consequence. They did not know I was the one holding the flashlight. I looked at the black notebook. It was a good start, but it was not enough. Ink on paper could be disputed. It could be called subjective. But a voice was a fingerprint. A voice was data. If they wanted to treat me like a liability, I would become the most dangerous kind of liability. I would become a witness. I closed my laptop. I did not drink the wine. I needed a clear head. I had to buy a voice recorder. I had to learn how to hide it. And I had to make sure that the next time Derek Vaughn opened his mouth to destroy someone, I would catch every single syllable. I bought the voice recorder on a rainy Tuesday evening. It was a nondescript device, no larger than a standard USB drive, matte black and utterly forgettable. It arrived in a brown cardboard box that I opened on my kitchen counter. I needed to know the range. I needed to know if it could pick up a whisper across a mahogany desk. I set it on the counter, walked to the living room, and read aloud the shopping list on my refrigerator. Milk, eggs, spinach, white wine. When I plugged it into my laptop and put on my headphones, the audio was terrifyingly crisp. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the rain hitting the window pane, and I could hear the slight tremor in my own voice as I read the word spinach. It picked up everything. It picked up every breath. It picked up the silence between the words. The next morning, I taped the recorder to the inside lining of my blazer, just below the left lapel. I secured it with gaffer tape so it would not shift or click if I moved suddenly. I stood in the bathroom stall at the office for 5 minutes, checking the mirror, making sure there was no bulge, no wire, no sign that I was walking around with a subpoena in my pocket. I walked into my one-on-one with Derek Vaughn at 10 in the morning. I reached into my jacket as if to adjust my blouse and slid the switch to the on position. Derek was in a good mood. He was leaning back in his chair, throwing a stress ball against the glass wall. "Isla, come in," he said. "Close the door." I sat down. The recorder felt heavy against my ribs, a hot coal burning through the fabric. "We need to talk about the recalcitrants on the implementation team," Derek said, catching the ball with a wet slap of his palm. "They are pushing back on the Omnicorp rollout schedule. They are talking about ethical deployment standards." He laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. I leaned forward. "Derek, They are worried that if we push the update before the security patch is ready, we are exposing client data. It is a valid ethical concern. Derek stopped throwing the ball. He looked at me, his eyes dead flat. Let me tell you something about enterprise software. Isla. Clients do not care how ethical we are. They care how integrated we are. Once we are in their stack, we are in. Ethics is a marketing term. Integration is a revenue term. I felt the tape vibrate slightly against my chest as he spoke. I kept my face neutral. I nodded slowly, as if I were absorbing a profound lesson rather than recording a confession. So we pushed the update regardless of the security risk, I asked, keeping my voice level. We pushed the update. Derek confirmed. We fixed the bugs in Q4. We recognized the revenue in Q3. That is how the game is played. That was the first recording. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost in my own office. I recorded everything. I recorded the morning war rooms. I recorded the casual hallway chats. I built a library of incriminating audio that would have made a forensic accountant weep. I captured Derek explaining the concept of ghost seats. Just bundle 50 extra licenses into the renewal. He told the sales team one Friday, they will never check the usage logs. If they ask, tell them it is a provisional buffer for future growth. We need the seat count up for the board deck. I captured him discussing backdating. If the contract comes in on October 2nd, we date it September 30th. He said, I do not care what the timestamp says. I care what the quarter looks like. Baystone needs a good Q4 story, and we are going to write it for them. It was not just bad management anymore. It was systematic fraud. But audio was only half the equation. I needed the paper trail to match the voice. The break came on a Thursday afternoon in the form of an automated notification from Salesforce. It was a Deal 1 alert for one of my largest accounts, a logistics giant based in Seattle. The notification said the contract value was $12 million. I frowned. I knew that deal. I was the one negotiating it. The term sheet I had sent to the client was for $4 million a year, renewable annually. The client had not signed it yet. In fact, the general counsel of the client was still redlining the indemnity clause. I logged into the dashboard. The opportunity was closed, the revenue was booked, and the contract attached to the record was not the one I had written. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I downloaded the attachment. It was a blurry PDF. It looked right at a glance, but the dates were wrong. The signature page looked pixelated, as if it had been copied and pasted from an older document. I needed eyes on this. I needed someone who understood the back end of the ledger better than I did. I found Elliot Ward in the break room. Elliot was a 24-year-old financial analyst who still wore his college lanyard. He was smart, quiet, and looked perpetually terrified of Derek Vaughn. Elliot, do you have a second? I asked. He jumped. Oh, hey Isla. Sure. I led him to a small conference room on the 4th floor, one that was rarely used because the air conditioning vent rattled. I closed the door. I did not record this conversation. Elliot was not a target. He was a terrified kid. I opened my laptop and turned it toward him. Elliot, look at the logistics contract. Look at the booking date. And look at the revenue recognition schedule. Elliot adjusted his glasses. He leaned in. He scrolled through the rows of data. I watched his face lose its color. That is weird, he whispered. What is weird? I asked. He pointed to the screen. The revenue is recognized up front, all 3 years. $12 million recognized in the current fiscal year. But the contract terms are annual billing. We are not supposed to recognize revenue until the service is delivered. And look at the signature date, I said. He squinted. It says October 1st. Today is October 12th. I said, the client has not signed it yet. Elliot, I am still holding the red line draft. Elliot stopped breathing for a second. He looked up at me, his eyes wide behind the lenses. Isla, if the client has not signed it, and the system says it is closed, then someone forced it through. I finished for him. He swallowed hard. Derek has been overriding the validation rules. He told us it was to streamline the approval process. He said he had verbal approvals from the clients. A verbal approval on a $12 million contract, I asked. Elliot looked like he was going to be sick. He pushed the laptop away. If the auditors see this, Isla, if we are booking 3 years of future revenue as current cash, that is inflation. That is cooking the books. I put a hand on his shoulder. It was trembling. Do not say anything to Derek. I said softly, just print the audit trail for me. Print the log of who modified the record and when. Can you do that? He nodded mutely. I left the room and walked straight to my car. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the keys in the ignition. I drove to a park 3 miles away, pulled into a secluded spot, and dialed a number I had not called in years. Sarah was my roommate in college. She was now a senior compliance attorney for a massive fintech firm in New York. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, stranger," she said. "Everything okay?" I skipped the pleasantries. Sarah, hypothetically, if a CRO of a portfolio company owned by a private equity firm was backdating contracts and recognizing multi-year revenue upfront without client signatures to inflate quarterly results for the investors. What are we looking at? The line went dead silent. Isla, Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave. That is not a hypothetical. Just tell me. I said, if that is accurate, she said, measuring every word. You are not looking at bad management. You are looking at securities fraud. You are looking at wire fraud. If Baystone is using those inflated numbers to raise a new fund or value the company for a sale, it is a felony. It is prison time. I stared out the windshield at a family walking their dog. The world looked so normal, but underneath, the ground was rotting. You need to be careful, Sarah said. If you know this, and you stay, you are complicit. You need to get out. I am getting out, I said, but I'm taking something with me. I hung up. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the physical copies of my enterprise contracts. The stack was thick, $540 million worth of paper. I flipped through the pages, ignoring the pricing tables, ignoring the service descriptions. I was looking for one specific section. I found it on page 14 of the Master Services Agreement. Termination for cause. I read the fine print. My finger traced the lines of text. Client may terminate this agreement immediately upon written notice if provider commits a material breach of its obligations, including but not limited to material misrepresentation of service capabilities, security standards, or financial standing. Material misrepresentation. Derek had said it on tape. Clients don't care how ethical we are. He was wrong. Clients cared very much about ethics when it gave them a legal trapdoor to escape a vendor they hated. I looked at the portfolio. For 11 years, I thought these contracts were chains that bound the clients to Helix Point. I thought they were the walls of the prison I had helped build. But as I sat there in the fading light, listening to the rain drum on the roof of my car, I realized I was looking at it backward. These contracts were not chains. They were keys. And I was the only one who knew how to turn them. If I could prove the fraud, if I could prove the material misrepresentation, every single one of these clients could walk away without penalty. I could drain the swamp. I started the car. I had the tapes. I had the numbers. And now, I had the weapon. Derek Vaughn wanted a war. He wanted to play the numbers game. I was about to show him that 0 was also a number. The quarterly business review tour is usually a victory lap. In a normal year, I would fly into Atlanta or Denver or New York, sit in a plush conference room with a CIO, and present a slide deck showing how much money Helix Point had saved them. We would drink expensive coffee, shake hands, and sign an upsell agreement for another 20% in services. But this was not a normal year, and this was not a victory lap. It was a reconnaissance mission. I traveled alone. Derek had tried to send a junior sales rep with me to audit my performance, but I convinced him that the travel budget was tight and that I needed to repair some relationships solo. He bought it because he was arrogant enough to believe I was trying to save my job. In reality, I was preparing to incinerate it. My first stop was in Seattle with the CFO of a massive logistics firm. We sat in his corner office overlooking the rain-slicked port. He was furious. He slammed a billing statement onto the glass table. Isla, explain this to me, he said, his face flushing red. We have 300 licenses. We have never used more than 250. Why am I being billed for 350 seats? And what is this administrative surcharge? I looked at the invoice. It was Derek's handiwork. He had bundled Ghost Seats licenses that didn't exist into the renewal under the guise of capacity planning. In the past, I would have spun a narrative. I would have talked about proactive scaling and ready-state infrastructure. I would have defended the company's shield. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of water. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. I cannot explain it. David, I said quietly, the usage data does not support that billing tier. He looked at me, surprised by my lack of defense. So what do? I am locked into a 3-year agreement. I looked at the door to make sure it was closed. Then I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough to force him to lean in too. David, have you read the Master Services Agreement lately specifically? Section 14, he frowned. No. Why? I held his gaze. It covers termination for material misrepresentation. If a vendor bills for services that were not rendered or misrepresents usage data to inflate an invoice, the client has the right to void the contract immediately, without penalty. David stopped breathing for a second. He looked at the invoice, then back at me. He saw the look in my eyes. I was not speaking as a Helix Point director. I was speaking as a conspirator. You are telling me I have options, he said slowly. I am telling you that you should audit your usage logs against your invoices, I said, picking up my bag. And if you find a discrepancy, you should know that you are not as trapped as you think you are. I did this across 6 cities in 10 days. I did not pitch. I did not sell. I planted seeds of doubt in fertile soil. I listened to complaints about missed feature deadlines, about the rude support staff Derek had outsourced, about the arrogance of the new executive team. And to every complaint, I offered the same quiet remedy. Section 14. The climax of my tour was a scheduled stop at the National SaaS Summit in Chicago. I knew Caleb Stone would be there. Caleb was the Chief Operating Officer of Orion Bridge Solutions, our biggest and fiercest rival. He was also the former VP of Sales at Helix Point, a man who had been pushed out by Baystone 2 years ago because he refused to cut his team's commissions. I found him at the hotel bar late on a Tuesday night. The air was thick with the smell of gin and expensive cologne. He was sitting in a leather booth, nursing a bourbon. He saw me approaching and smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind you share with a veteran who served in the same trenches. Isla Watson, he said, raising his glass. To what do I owe the pleasure I heard things are getting bloody over at the Death Star? I sat down opposite him. Bloody is an understatement. Caleb, it is a butcher shop. He signaled the waitress for another round. I heard about Derek Vaughn. The man is a demolition expert. How long until the whole thing collapses? I looked around the bar to ensure no one from Helix Point was nearby. It collapses when the foundation gives out. Caleb, and the foundation is the client base. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He took a slow sip of his drink. The ice clinked against the glass. You look tired. Isla, he said softly. I am tired. I admitted. I am tired of apologizing for things I did not break. He leaned across the table. His voice dropped to a rumble. You know, if you ever get tired of cleaning up their mess, I could clear half my roadmap if it meant bringing your accounts over. We have the infrastructure now. We just need the relationships. It was half a joke, half a proposition. He was testing the waters. I did not laugh. I picked up a cocktail napkin and a pen. Hypothetically. Caleb, I said, if a significant volume of enterprise business were to become available suddenly, how fast can you move? Caleb stopped smiling. He looked at the napkin, then at me. He realized this was not a grievance session. This was a negotiation. How significant, he asked. Tier 1, I said. Fortune 500. High volume. Complex integrations. He did the math in his head. If we pulled the implementation teams off the mid-market projects, we could onboard maybe 10 large accounts in a quarter. Not fast enough. I said, I am talking about 90 days, full migration, data parity, no downtime. He whistled low. That is aggressive. We would need to script the migration tools in advance. We would need to match their pricing structure without seeing their books. I began to write on the napkin. I sketched out a rough architecture of the transfer. I listed the average seat counts, the data volumes, and the pricing thresholds that would make the clients jump. If you can match this pricing, I said, tapping the number I had written, and if you can guarantee a legal indemnity clause for the transition period, they will move. They are angry. Caleb, they just need a landing zone. Caleb looked at the napkin. He looked at the pricing model. It was aggressive, but it was profitable for Orion Bridge. I can get this approved, he said. I can have the contracts drawn up as conditional letters of intent. But Isla, you need to be careful. Baystone will come after you with everything they have. Non-competes, trade secret theft. I took the napkin back and folded it into my pocket. Let them come. When I returned to Dallas, I made one final stop before going home. I visited a small law office in a strip mall in Plano. It was not a fancy firm with a glass lobby. It was a solo practitioner named Robert who specialized in labor disputes. I paid him in cash for a consultation. I sat in his cluttered office and laid out my situation. I showed him the non-compete clause in my contract. Robert laughed when he read it. 2 years worldwide scope. In the software industry, he tossed the paper onto his desk. Texas courts hate this stuff. Isla, it is too broad. It restricts your right to earn a living, but that is not even your best defense. What is, I asked? Retaliation, he said. If you are fired because you uncovered illegal activity, or if you leave because the company was asking you to commit fraud, the non-compete is virtually unenforceable. It is called unclean hands. They cannot ask a court to enforce a contract when they are breaching the law. He looked at me over his glasses. But you need to be clean. Isla, you cannot take their code. You cannot take their client lists in a digital format that they can trace. No USB drives with customer databases. No forwarding emails to your Gmail. I nodded. Everything stays in my head. Everything stays in your head, Robert said, or on paper. Hard copies and personal relationships. You cannot steal a client list, but you cannot be stopped from calling your friends. That night, I began the process of sanitizing my exit. I did not download a single file from the company server. Instead, I went through my phone. Over 11 years, I had texted with every major stakeholder in my portfolio. I had their cell phone numbers. I had their personal emails. I sat at my desk with a fresh notebook, not the black one I used for evidence, but a blue one for the future. I handwrote every name, every number, every personal detail I knew, the name of the CFO's dog, the college where the CIO's daughter was applying. These were not trade secrets. These were memories. I went through my emails on my phone, looking only for the ones sent to me by clients, not the ones I sent from the corporate server. I saved the contact cards to my personal cloud, ensuring there was no IP trail linking back to Helix Point's network. Then, I opened my personal laptop. I created a spreadsheet. I listed the clients I had visited. I listed the ones who had complained about billing. I listed the ones I knew were at their breaking point. I entered the annual contract value for each one: 12 million, 18 million, 7 million, 35 million. I highlighted the rows in yellow. These were the clients who trusted me. These were the clients who would follow me into a burning building because they knew I would carry them out. I summed the column. The number stared back at me in black and white pixels. $540 million. It was a staggering amount of money. It was enough to sink Helix Point's stock price. It was enough to get Derek Vaughn fired. It was enough to trigger an SEC investigation. I closed the laptop. The house was silent. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not stealing. I was liberating. I was taking back the value I had created, dollar by dollar, relationship by relationship. The rival was waiting in the wings. The clients were waiting for a signal, and I was waiting for the axe to fall. I knew it was coming. I could feel the tension in the office, the way Derek watched me, the way HR stopped making eye contact. They were sharpening the blade. They did not know that I had already moved the neck they wanted to chop. I went to bed that night and slept soundly for the first time in months. The quiet alliance was formed. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was let them spring it. The notification arrived on a Tuesday morning with the innocent chime of Outlook. The subject line read, "Development Opportunity." In the lexicon of modern corporate management, this is the most cynical euphemism in existence. It does not mean they want to develop you. It means they have already decided to fire you, and they need to build a paper trail to protect themselves from a wrongful termination lawsuit. It was the invitation to my own execution, formatted in Calibri size 11 font. I walked into the conference room at 2 in the afternoon. Derek Vaughn was already there, connecting his laptop to the projector. Melanie Rhodes sat at the end of the table, her posture rigid, a notebook open in front of her. The atmosphere was not one of coaching, it was an arraignment. "Sit down, Isla," Derek said without looking up. I took my seat. On the screen, projected in high definition, was a screenshot of a Slack message I had sent 3 weeks prior. It was a message to the finance team regarding the renewal of a healthcare account. The text on the screen read, "We cannot legally backdate this contract without the client receiving a new term sheet. It puts us in breach of the master services agreement." Derek pointed a laser clicker at the screen. The red dot danced over the word legally. "This is what we need to discuss." "Isla," Derek said. This tone, it is obstructionist. I looked from the screen to Derek. I was stating a fact. "Derek, backdating a contract without client consent is fraud. Pointing that out is not obstruction, it is compliance." Derek sighed. A theatrical exhale meant to convey that I was exhausting his limited patience. "See, that is the problem. You view everything through a lens of limitation. We view it through a lens of creativity. When you use words like breach and legally in a public channel, you create panic. You signal to the team that leadership is asking them to do something wrong. It is a morale killer," Melanie chimed in, her voice soft and treacherous. "Isla, we are placing you on a performance improvement plan. The goal of this PEP is to help you align your communication style with the company's new direction. We need you to demonstrate more adaptability and less rigidity." She slid a document across the table. It was 3 pages long. It listed vague objectives like demonstrate commitment to revenue velocity and adopt a solutions-oriented mindset. But then, Derek did something that handed me the keys to his own coffin. He pulled a second sheet of paper from his folder. "And to ensure we are all on the same page," he said, "we are reactivating the coaching and performance documentation consent form. You remember signing this 6 months ago during the annual compliance sweep? I looked at the form. I remembered it perfectly. It was a blanket policy introduced by legal to protect the company during HR disputes. I read the text again, my eyes locking onto paragraph 3. In the interest of transparency and accountability, any coaching or disciplinary session may be documented via audio recording or written transcript by any participating party to ensure the accuracy of the record. By any participating party. I felt a jolt of electricity run through my nerves. Derek thought this form was a leash to keep me in line, a way to tell me that Big Brother was watching. He had forgotten that contracts work both ways. He had just given me written, signed permission to record him. It superseded the one-party consent law. It was not just legal now, it was company policy. I picked up a pen. I signed the PP acknowledgement. Then I looked at Derek. "I understand," I said. "I am fully committed to the process." "Good," Derek said, snapping his laptop shut. "We will have weekly check-ins to monitor your progress." The first check-in happened 2 days later. It was just the two of us in his office. I had the recorder taped to my ribs. But this time, I felt a new kind of confidence. I was not sneaking around. I was following the protocol he had just enforced. I walked in and closed the door. Derek was staring out the window at the Dallas skyline. He looked like a man who believed he owned everything the light touched. "How are you feeling about the plan?" "Isla," he asked, not turning around. "I am trying to understand the expectations," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Specifically regarding the revenue targets. You mentioned in the last meeting that my ethical concerns were slowing down the deal flow." He turned around and sat on the edge of his desk. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Isla, look, you have been here a long time, maybe too long. You are holding on to a version of this company that does not exist anymore." I paused. I needed him to be specific. I needed the soundbite. Are you saying that following the compliance handbook is no longer part of the company culture? I asked. He laughed. It was that same dry, dismissive sound. I am saying that if you are not fully on board with Baystone's growth story, you might want to think about your future elsewhere. We are building a rocket ship, and you are worrying about the seatbelts. He stood up and walked closer to me, invading my personal space. The truth is, Isla, you have become emotionally expensive. Every time I ask for a number, you give me a lecture. Every time I ask for a deal to close, you give me a regulation. I cannot afford that tax on my energy. I need soldiers, not philosophers. Emotionally expensive. The words hung in the air. It was a phrase so dripping with discrimination and unprofessionalism that I almost smiled. He was firing a high-performing female director because her adherence to the law was taxing his energy. I did not fight back. In the past, I would have argued. I would have pulled up my sales reports. I would have shown him that my portfolio was the most profitable in the company, but I was done trying to save my job. I was documenting a crime scene. I understand. Derek, I said softly, I will try to be less of a burden. He nodded, satisfied that he had broken me. Good. Let us see some movement on the Omnicorp deal by Friday. I left his office and went straight to the bathroom. I locked the stall door and stopped the recording. I checked the file. 10 minutes and 42 seconds of pure gold. The invitation for the final blow arrived on Thursday afternoon. It was an email from Melanie. Subject: Final review of PIP progress. Time Friday. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The timeline was accelerated. A PIP usually lasts 30 days. Mine had lasted 72 hours. They were not waiting for improvement. They were clearing the decks before the quarter closed. They wanted me out of the building so they could seize my accounts and book the fraudulent revenue without my interference. They were going to frame it as a termination for cause. They would claim I failed the performance plan. They would use that to deny my severance and, more importantly, to enforce the non-compete agreement. They would paint me as a bitter, incompetent employee who could not handle the new speed of business. This was the bad lever narrative. I packed up my desk slowly that evening. I did not take much. I took my succulent. I took the framed photo of my team from 3 years ago. Back when we were happy, I left the awards. I left the plaques. They belonged to Helix Point. I drove home in silence. When I got to my apartment, I did not turn on the lights. I sat at my dining table and opened my laptop. I pulled an external hard drive from my bag. It was a rugged, encrypted drive. I began the transfer. Folder 1 audio logs. I dragged the files over. The refrigerator list test. The integration over ethics confession. The emotionally expensive rant. Folder 2. Financial discrepancies. I added the screenshots Elliot had given me, the audit trails showing the manual overrides on revenue recognition, the PDFs of the unsigned contracts that had been booked as closed deals. Folder 3. The consent form. I scanned the copy of the coaching consent form I had signed. I highlighted the paragraph about recording. This was my shield. If they tried to sue me for wiretapping, this document would blow up in their faces. Folder 4, Client Communications. I added the sanitized logs of my client interactions, the complaints about billing, the confusion over the new pricing, the documented instances where Helix Point had failed to deliver on contractual promises. I created a master folder on the desktop. I named it For Counsel. Orion Bridge. Outside. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, green pixels filling up the white bar. It looked like a download, but it felt like a weapon loading into a chamber. At 11 o'clock at night, the transfer was complete. I ejected the drive and held it in my hand. It was cold and heavy. It contained the destruction of a reputation and the salvation of $540 million in business. I poured myself a glass of water and looked at the clock. The meeting was in 17 hours. Derek Vaughn was probably sleeping soundly in his penthouse, dreaming of his bonus. He thought he was walking into a routine execution. He thought he was going to crush a nuisance. He did not know that the nuisance had spent the last week building a guillotine. I placed the drive in my purse. I checked my outfit for the next day. I wanted to look professional. I wanted to look composed. I wanted to look like someone who had nothing to hide and everything to give. The trap was set. The paper trail was complete. All that was left was to walk into the room, take the hit, and then pull the trigger. I did not go home to cry into a pillow. I did not call my mother. I drove 3 miles down the road to a 24-hour coffee shop on Lemon Avenue, the kind with fluorescent lights that hum loudly enough to drown out a conversation and Wi-Fi strong enough to upload a terabyte of data. I bought a black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and found a booth in the back corner, away from the window. I opened my personal laptop. It was 11 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. The adrenaline in my veins was not the shaky, panic-induced kind I had felt in the elevator. It was cold and steady. It was the focus of a surgeon stepping up to the table. I opened a secure video link. Caleb Stone was already there, waiting. Beside him in the frame sat 2 men in suits, who I assumed were Orion Bridge's general counsel. Did they do it? Caleb asked. No pleasantries. I held up the termination letter with the coffee stain on my name. They did. I said, effective immediately. Keycard disabled. Access revoked. Caleb nodded to the lawyers. The clock starts now. Isla, send the package. I plugged in the external hard drive. I opened the encrypted messaging portal they had set up for me. I dragged the folder named Whistleblower Evidence into the upload box. This was the point of no return. Inside that folder was the audio of Derek Vaughn admitting to fraud. There were the emails pressuring the finance team to recognize revenue before contracts were signed. There was the consent form that made every recording legal, and there were the billing audits I had compiled, showing exactly how Helix Point was overcharging its clients to inflate its valuation for Baystone Capital. My lawyer, Robert, had reviewed every file. He had assured me that by sending this to a competitor who was also acting as a potential landing spot for defrauded clients, I was protected under specific whistleblower statutes. I was not stealing trade secrets. I was reporting a crime to the market. Upload complete. We have it, one of the lawyers said, typing furiously on his own machine. We are reviewing the consent form now. It looks solid. The broad language covers you. Caleb looked at the camera. Isla, I just emailed you the employment agreement. It is dated for today. Senior Vice President of Strategic Accounts. The Whistleblower Protection Clause is in Section 8. Sign it, and you are officially under our umbrella. I opened the document. I scrolled to the signature line. I did not hesitate. I typed my name. I am in. I said, good. Caleb said, now let us burn the house down. The strategy we had devised was a pincer movement. Orion Bridge would handle the legal heavy lifting, drafting conditional letters of intent that allowed clients to switch vendors if an investigation revealed material breach. My job was to pull the fire alarm. I opened my personal email client. I had 12 drafts saved, 12 emails addressed to the 12 most powerful people in my portfolio. These were the CIOs and CFOs who controlled $540 million of annual spending. These were the people whose kids' birthdays I knew, whose favorite scotch I bought for Christmas. I opened the first draft. It was addressed to Marcus Thorne, the CIO of a global retail conglomerate based in New York. Subject confidential. Your Helix Point agreement rights. I took a deep breath. I was about to light a match in a room full of gasoline. I typed the body of the message. I did not use emotional language. I did not sound like a disgruntled employee. I wrote with the precision of an auditor. Dear Marcus, as of 4:12 this afternoon, I am no longer with Helix Point Systems. However, before my departure, I became aware of billing irregularities affecting your account, specifically regarding the unauthorized addition of ghost licenses to your Q3 renewal. Please review your invoice dated October 1st against your actual usage logs. You will find a discrepancy of approximately 14%. Under Section 14 of your Master Services Agreement, this constitutes a material misrepresentation of services. I have attached a letter from independent counsel confirming that you have the right to suspend payments immediately pending an internal audit. You have options. Regards, Isla. I attached the legal opinion letter. I attached the conditional letter of intent from Orion Bridge, which offered to match their pricing and cover all legal fees associated with the transition. I did this 11 more times. Seattle, Atlanta, Chicago, London. I customized each email. For one, it was about the backdated contract. For another, it was about the security patch that was never installed. I gave them the ammunition they needed to declare a breach of contract. At 11:58 at night, I hit send on the final email. I sat back against the vinyl booth. The coffee shop was empty except for a student studying for finals and a janitor mopping the floor. It was silent. Then, at 12:14 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a video call request. Marcus Thorne. I put on my headset and accepted the call. Marcus was sitting in his home office in Westchester, wearing a bathrobe. His face was a mask of controlled fury. "Isla," he said, his voice low. "Is this real?" "It is real." "Marcus," I said, "check the logs." I hear typing on his end. I waited. "Son of a bitch," he whispered. "They billed us for 4,000 seats. We only have 3,200 active users. That is an overcharge of $2 million. He looked up at the camera. He was not angry at me. He was angry at the betrayal. "Derek Vaughn called me last week," Marcus said. "He told me he was personally auditing the account to ensure efficiency. He was lying to my face while he padded the bill. He lied to all of us." "Marcus," I said. Marcus rubbed his temples. "What is this Orion Bridge document?" "It is a lifeboat," I said. "It is a conditional transfer. If you sign it, it does not commit you to move today. But it signals to Helix Point's board that you are aware of the breach and that you have a provider ready to take over if they do not fix it. It gives you leverage." "Send it to legal," Marcus said. "I want a draft ready by morning. If this checks out, I am pulling the plug." The calls kept coming. At 1:30 in the morning, I was on the phone with the general counsel of a logistics firm in Atlanta. She was looking at the backdated contract I had flagged. "This is securities fraud," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "They booked revenue they did not have." "Isla, thank you. You just saved me from signing a compliance certification that would have perjured me." At 2:45 in the morning, the CFO of the healthcare giant in Seattle called. He did not even say hello. "I am looking at the termination clause," he said. "You are right. Material misrepresentation. It voids the non-compete. It voids the cancellation fees. We can walk away free and clear." I watched the dominoes fall. These were not just clients. They were powerful executives who hated being lied to. Derek Vaughn had treated them like ATMs. He had forgotten that they were sharks. On the other side of the digital divide, the legal team at Orion Bridge was receiving the signals. Caleb was coordinating the intake. Every time a client confirmed they found the error, Orion Bridge sent over the formal letter of intent. The terms were simple. "We will honor your current pricing. We will migrate your data for free. We will indemnify you against any lawsuit Helix Point tries to file." It was an offer they could not refuse because the alternative was staying with a vendor that was stealing from them. I drank the cold coffee. My eyes burned. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion. But I could not stop. At 3:10 in the morning, the last call ended. It was a smaller account, but a loyal one. The VP of operations just said one thing before hanging up. "Go get them, Isla." I sat in the silence of the cafe. The student had left. The janitor was gone. It was just me and the hum of the refrigerator. My phone vibrated one last time. A text message from Caleb. Time 3:17 in the morning. "We have signed letters of intent and notices of intent from $540 million in annual contract value contingent on their internal reviews. You just moved half their book into our pipeline in one night." I stared at the number. $540 million. It was more than money. It was vindication. It was the mathematical proof that relationships mattered more than spreadsheets. Derek Vaughn had fired me to save a few $100,000 in salary. In return, I had cost him $500 million before he even woke up to make his morning espresso. I opened my black moleskin notebook. I turned to the page where I had written the details of my firing. I took my pen and wrote a final entry for the day. They fired me at 4:12 in the afternoon. At 3:17 in the morning, their future revenue left with me. I closed the notebook. I closed the laptop. I stood up and stretched my stiff limbs. I walked out of the coffee shop into the cool night air. The city was asleep, but in a few hours, the sun would rise, and Helix Point would wake up to a nightmare they had designed themselves. Monday morning at Helix Point Systems usually began with the aggressive hum of espresso machines and the performative busyness of account executives trying to look productive before the 9 o'clock stand-up. But this particular Monday was different. This Monday began with the sound of a server crashing under the weight of legal threats. I was not there to see it. Of course, I was sitting on my patio in my pajamas, drinking tea and watching a cardinal peck at the bird feeder. But I did not need to be in the building to know what the atmosphere was like. I knew the rhythm of that office better than I knew the back of my own hand. It started at 8:15 in the morning. That is when the East Coast General Counsels get to their desks. The first email hit the inbox of the Chief Financial Officer. It was from the legal team of the retail conglomerate in New York. The subject line was stark notice of material breach and immediate suspension of payments. It was copied to the audit committee of the board and the external counsel for Baystone Capital. By 8:30, 3 more emails arrived. One from Atlanta, one from Chicago, one from Seattle. They all used the same terrifying language. Immediate review of billing practices, discrepancy in license allocation, potential fraudulent inducement. By 9 o'clock, the finance department was in a state of full-blown cardiac arrest. The analysts who usually spent their mornings tweaking spreadsheets to make the margins look prettier were now staring at a dashboard that was bleeding red. They realized with dawning horror that the clients sending these letters were not the small, churn-prone accounts. They were the whales. They were the accounts that Derek Vaughn had listed as locked and secure in his last presentation to the board. The revenue forecast for the fiscal year did not just dip, it evaporated. $540 million in projected contract value vanished from the pipeline in 45 minutes. I imagine Derek Vaughn walked into the office around 9:15, wearing his signature Italian loafers, expecting to fire a few more people to start his week right. Instead, he was met by the general counsel of Helix Point, a man named Marcus, who usually looked like he was asleep but was now very much awake. "There is an emergency board meeting in 10 minutes. Marcus told him. "Baystone partners are dialing in. You need to get to the conference room now." I heard the details later from a friend in IT who survived the purge. The boardroom was a slaughterhouse. The Baystone partners were on the large screen, their faces pixelated but their rage high definition. They wanted to know why $500 million of their investment was threatening to walk out the door. They wanted to know why 12 major clients were alleging fraud. Derek tried to run his usual play. He tried to blame the toxicity of the legacy culture. "This is clearly a coordinated attack by a disgruntled ex-employee," Derek said, pacing the room. "Isla Watson was fired for performance issues on Friday. She is lashing out. She is unstable. We can contain this. We just need to enforce her non-compete and send a cease and desist." He was confident. He thought he could spin the narrative. He thought he could paint me as the crazy, emotional woman who could not handle the pressure. But then, the head of legal cleared his throat. He placed a laptop on the table. "It is not just a disgruntled employee. Derek," the lawyer said. "We received a package from Orion Bridge's legal team this morning. It contains digital evidence." Derek waved his hand. "Whatever she has is inadmissible. It is illegal recording. We will sue her for wiretapping." The lawyer shook his head. He pulled up a document on the screen. It was the coaching and performance documentation consent form, the one Derek had forced me to sign, the one he had signed himself. "You signed this, Derek," the lawyer said quietly. "You authorize the recording of all disciplinary sessions to ensure accountability. She did not wiretap you. You gave her a microphone. Then, the lawyer pressed play. The voice of Derek Vaughn filled the room. It was crisp and clear. Clients do not care how ethical we are. They care how integrated we are. The partners on the screen went silent. The lawyer skipped ahead. "Just bundle 50 extra licenses into the renewal. They will never check the usage logs." The silence grew heavier. "We fixed the bugs in Q4. We recognize the revenue in Q3. That is how the game is played." The recording stopped. Derek stood frozen at the head of the table. He looked at the screen, then at the lawyer, Then at the door, for the first time in his life, he had no buzzwords. He had no pivot. He had been caught, in his own voice, authorized by his own signature, admitting to securities fraud. While the boardroom was imploding, the chaos spilled out into the open floor. Melanie Rhodes in Human Resources was frantically searching through her files. She had been copied on the legal notice regarding the hostile work environment. She opened the complaint log. She saw the dozens of entries I had made over the last 6 months. The entries she had dismissed as subjective. The entries she had labeled as resistance to change. Now, with the context of the recordings and the billing fraud, those notes did not look subjective anymore. They looked like a documented history of negligence. She realized that by ignoring my warnings to protect Derek, she had made the company liable for millions of dollars in retaliation damages. At 10:30 in the morning, a company-wide email went out. It was short and brutal. Effective immediately. All one-on-one performance meetings are suspended until further notice. No individual employment actions are to be taken without a representative from legal present. The staff looked at each other over their monitors. The managers who had been mimicking Derek's aggressive style suddenly looked very nervous. The mood shifted from fear to confusion, and then to a dark, simmering excitement. At 11 o'clock, the doors to the conference room opened. Derek Vaughn did not walk out alone. He was flanked by 2 security guards. The same guards he had ordered to escort me out on Friday were now standing on either side of him. He was not carrying a box. He was not allowed to touch his computer. He was not allowed to go back to his office. He walked down the long hallway, past the rows of glass-walled offices. The sales floor went dead silent. Heads popped up like gophers. People stopped typing. They watched the wartime CRO, the man who had called them baggage, being marched toward the elevator like a common thief. Someone in the back, a junior developer I had hired 2 years ago, whispered loud enough to be heard, "Is this about Isla?" Derek stared straight ahead. His jaw clenched so hard I imagine his teeth were cracking. He stepped into the elevator, the doors closed, and just like that, the war was over. But his ego was not dead yet. Around noon, a notification popped up on LinkedIn. Derek had posted a status update. It was a photo of a sunset, accompanied by a caption that read, "Taking some time to reflect and recharge after an intense chapter. Proud of the transformation we started. Looking forward to the next challenge. Leadership growth." It stayed up for exactly 12 minutes. Then, it disappeared. Baystone's lawyers had likely called him and explained that posting on social media while under investigation for fraud was a very bad way to avoid prison. Back at my house, the adrenaline of the night before had faded into a strange peace. I watered my plants. I made a sandwich. I felt like I was on a vacation I had earned 10 years ago. At 2 in the afternoon, my phone pinged with a new email. It was not from a client. It was not from a friend. It was from Elena Morales. I knew the name. Elena Morales was a partner at a top-tier law firm in Dallas, the kind that costs $1,000 an hour. She was the outside counsel representing the audit committee of Helix Point. Subject request for interview. Confidential investigation. I opened it. Dear Ms. Watson, we have been retained by the board of directors of Helix Point Systems to conduct an independent investigation into the allegations raised in your recent correspondence with company clients. We would like to request an interview with you to fully understand the scope of your allegations and the extent of potential misreporting. Please let us know your availability. I smiled. They wanted me to come back. They wanted me to help them find the bodies. They realized that I was the only person who knew where all the skeletons were buried because I was the one who had refused to hold the shovel. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Robert, they want a meeting." I said, "I figured they would." Robert said, sounding cheerful, "Do you want to do it?" "I do." I said, "But not as an employee. I am not going in there to do an exit interview." Robert laughed. "No, you are not. You are going in there as a cooperating witness who is currently a senior vice president at their main competitor." I drafted my reply. Dear Ms. Morales, I am willing to meet with the audit committee to discuss the factual evidence I have preserved. However, Please be advised that I am now employed by Orion Bridge Solutions. Any discussion will be conducted with my counsel present, and I will be speaking solely in my capacity as a witness to past events, not as a representative of Helix Point. I sent it. I closed my laptop. I thought about the glass conference room where they had fired me. I thought about the coffee stain on my name. I thought about Derek's sneer when he called me the office mom. They had wanted me to be a mother. They wanted me to clean up their messes, nurture their egos, and sacrifice my own needs for the good of the family. Well, the mother was coming back home, but this time, she was not bringing cookies. She was bringing the discipline. The conference room in the neutral law office in downtown Dallas smelled of lemon polish and expensive fear. It was a sterile environment, the kind designed to strip emotion out of conflicts that were entirely emotional. We sat on opposite sides of a 20-foot mahogany table. On one side, the legal team for Helix Point, accompanied by a very nervous representative from Baystone Capital. On my side, the general counsel for Orion Bridge, my personal lawyer Robert, and me. Between us sat a stack of paper 3 inches thick. It contained conditional letters of intent, transcripts of audio recordings, and billing audits. It was a pile of paper worth $540 million. The lead attorney for Helix Point, a man with gray hair and a tie that looked tighter than a tourniquet, spoke first. He did not look at me. He looked at the papers. "We are prepared to file for an immediate injunction," he said, his voice flat. "Ms. Watson has actively poached protected clients in direct violation of her non-solicitation agreement. She has utilized trade secrets, specifically client lists and pricing models, to undercut Helix Point's business. We are seeking damages equal to the projected revenue loss, plus punitive damages for tortious interference." It was a strong opening. In a normal world, it would have been terrifying. But Robert, my lawyer, just leaned back in his chair and took off his reading glasses. He did not shout. He did not slam the table. He simply opened a folder. "I think we need to review the enforceability of that agreement," Robert said calmly. "First, under Texas law, the non-compete restrictions placed on Ms. Watson are overly broad in both geography and scope, rendering them effectively void. But more importantly, we need to talk about the doctrine of unclean hands." The Helix Point lawyer stiffened. "Ms. Watson did not steal trade secrets," Robert continued. "She provided her clients with information regarding their own contracts. She advised them on their own rights under Section 14 regarding termination for material misrepresentation. If Helix Point had not been materially misrepresenting its services and billing, Ms. Watson would have had nothing to share." Robert slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the transcript of Derek Vaughn admitting to backdating contracts. "Any damages Helix Point has suffered," Robert said, "are a direct result of the fraudulent activities directed by your chief revenue officer, Ms. Watson did not cause the revenue loss. She merely illuminated the exit signs in a burning building." The room went silent. The representative from Baystone Capital, a man named Sterling who had flown in from New York that morning, reached out and picked up the transcript. He read it. His face did not change, but the color drained from his cheeks. He was not looking at a lawsuit anymore. He was looking at a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation. "Ms. Watson," Sterling said, looking at me for the first time. "Is this accurate?" I sat forward. I placed my hands on the table. "It is accurate," I said. My voice was steady. "For 11 years, I built those relationships on trust. When Derek Vaughn arrived, he replaced that trust with manipulation. He instructed the team to inflate seat counts. He instructed finance to recognize revenue before signatures were obtained. He described ethical concerns as being emotionally expensive." I paused. I watched Sterling's eyes. "I did not poach your clients," I said. "I saved them from being defrauded. And in doing so, I saved myself from being complicit in a felony." Sterling turned to his lawyer. He whispered something urgent. The lawyer nodded slowly. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The question was no longer how to destroy Isla Watson. The question was how to stop the bleeding before the investors found out that $540 million had been reported prematurely. If this goes to court, Robert said softly, everything becomes public record. The audio tapes, the audit trails, the fake revenue recognition. Sterling raised a hand to stop him. He knew the math. A lawsuit would destroy the company's valuation entirely. A settlement would only cost them money. We need a recess, Sterling said. They left the room for 40 minutes. When they returned, the aggression was gone. They looked like men who had just defused a bomb but lost a few fingers in the process. We are prepared to offer a settlement, the Helix Point lawyer said. The terms were hammered out over the next 2 hours. They were brutal for Helix Point, but necessary for their survival. First, Helix Point would drop all claims against me and Orion Bridge. There would be no lawsuit for poaching, no injunction on the non-compete. Second, they would pay out every cent of the commissions they had tried to withhold, plus a significant settlement for wrongful termination and retaliation. Third, and most importantly, Helix Point was required to send a formal notice to the affected clients. The notice would state that due to an internal governance review, the company was adjusting its billing practices and would allow any client who wished to transition to a new provider to do so without penalty. It was a surrender. They were opening the gates. I signed the papers. My hand did not shake. The aftermath was swift and cold. 2 days later, a leaked internal email from Baystone Capital made its way to the industry blogs. Derek Vaughn had been terminated for cause effective immediately. There was no golden parachute. There was no severance. He was escorted out of the building by the same security team he had used to intimidate his staff. Baystone installed an interim chief revenue officer, whose sole job was to clean up the compliance mess. Melanie Rhodes in Human Resources was placed on administrative leave pending an external audit of her department's handling of whistleblower complaints. Several other managers who had been complicit in the culture of fear were quietly moved to non-leadership roles. I did not gloat. I did not post about it on social media. I simply watched from a distance as the system corrected itself. The following week, I sat in Caleb Stone's office at Orion Bridge. The offer letter was on his desk. It was for the role of Senior Vice President of Strategic Accounts. The salary was higher than what I had made at Helix Point. The equity package was generous, but I did not sign it immediately. I need one more thing. Caleb, I said. Caleb smiled. You have $500 million of business following you here. Isla, you can have whatever office you want. I do not want an office, I said. I want a charter. I slid a document across his desk. I had typed it up the night before. I want us to codify a client ethics charter. I said, it binds us to transparency, no backdating contracts, no ghost seats, no recognizing revenue before delivery, and no retaliation against employees who flag compliance issues. If I am going to bring these clients here, I need to know they are safe. I need to know we are not just Helix Point with a different logo. Caleb picked up the document. He read it carefully. He looked at me, and I saw a level of respect that Derek Vaughn had never been capable of understanding. Done, Caleb said. He signed the charter, then he handed me the pen to sign my contract. 3 months later, the transition was complete. The $540 million in contracts had successfully migrated to Orion Bridge. My team was growing. We were busy. But it was a good kind of busy. It was the honest work of building something real. On a Tuesday morning, I walked into the training room at Orion Bridge. 20 new account executives were sitting in rows, eager and nervous. They were the future of the company. I walked to the front of the room. I placed a thick, dark blue binder on the table. The cover read, How Not to Burn Down a $540 Million Book of Business. The room went quiet. A young man in the front row raised his hand. Ms. Watson, he asked, did you write this? I looked at the binder. It was filled with case studies of what happens when you prioritize quarterly profits over human relationships. It was a manual on how to treat clients like partners rather than extraction points. I smiled at him. It was a genuine smile. The kind that comes from knowing you have survived the fire and walked out carrying the gold. No, I said. Helix Point wrote it. I just edited the ending. The story ends there. It does not end with a parade. It ends with a lesson. When a system tries to use a contract to strangle you, remember that the contract is just a set of rules, and if you read the rules closely enough, you can usually find the one that lets you cut off their oxygen and build a new game somewhere else. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to Boss Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.